Ethan Reynolds had built his entire life on precision, patience, and profit. And for nearly 2 decades in Chicago's ruthless real estate world, those principles had never failed him, until the afternoon when everything he thought he understood about success unraveled on a forgotten patch of land at the city's edge, where broken fences leaned like tired men and one last, decaying house waited to be erased from the map. Ethan stood there in a tailored charcoal coat, leather shoes untouched by dust, clipboard tucked under his arm, nodding along as engineers discussed demolition schedules for what would soon become a gleaming luxury development of glass towers and manicured courtyards, the kind of place designed for people who never worried about rent or winter. And just as the excavator's engine roared to life, his eyes drifted toward the doorway of the old house, where a woman stood frozen as if carved from regret itself, her coat too thin for the season, her hair pulled back hastily, exhaustion etched into every line of her face, and clinging to her legs were 2 small children, a boy and a girl no older than 5, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear, and in that instant something in Ethan's chest tightened painfully, because even before memory caught up with reason, he knew who she was. Her name was Lila Morgan, the woman he had loved before ambition taught him how to abandon things that slowed him down, the woman who had disappeared from his life 6 years earlier after a quiet argument he never bothered to chase, because his career was finally taking off, and his powerful future father-in-law had made it clear there was no place in their empire for emotional distractions. And now here she stood, staring at the machinery that threatened to crush the only shelter her children had ever known, begging a stranger in a suit she didn't recognize to give her one more day because her children were sick and had nowhere else to go, her voice trembling as she explained how shelters were full and wages were thin, and how she would leave by morning if only she could keep them safe through the night. And when Ethan finally stepped closer and removed his glasses, the recognition hit her like a blow, her breath catching, her face draining of color as the past rushed back in a way neither of them had prepared for, because standing before her was the man who had once promised her forever and then chosen contracts over commitment, wealth over responsibility, silence over fatherhood, and before either could speak, the site foreman arrived demanding to know why the equipment wasn't moving, and something remarkable happened then, something entirely out of character for the man Ethan had become, because without calculating costs or consequences, he ordered everything shut down immediately, shocking his staff and investors alike. And when Lila suddenly collapsed from exhaustion, her body finally surrendering after years of sacrifice, Ethan dropped to his knees in the dirt without hesitation, lifting her carefully while the children cried in confusion. And in that moment the distance between billionaire developer and desperate mother dissolved into something painfully human as he learned the truth he had never asked for, that Lila had been pregnant when she left, that fear and pride had kept her silent, that the twins, Noah and Claire, were his, and that she had worked herself into sickness just to keep them fed, often skipping meals so they could eat, sleeping in that condemned house because it was all she could afford. And as the ambulance took her to the hospital, Ethan sat in the back holding his children, listening to their small breaths, realizing with devastating clarity that every tower he had built meant nothing compared to the lives he had neglected. And later that night, when he returned to the sprawling modern mansion he shared with his wife, Charlotte, a woman chosen not for love, but for strategic alignment, he didn't soften his words or hide behind excuses. He simply told her the truth, that he had children, that he had found the family he never knew he lost, and that he was done living a life built entirely for appearances. And when she threatened lawsuits, financial ruin, and public humiliation, he felt nothing but relief, because fear no longer held power over a man who had nearly lost his children without ever knowing them. And as he sat alone in that echoing house, surrounded by expensive furniture that suddenly felt hollow, he understood that success without connection was just isolation dressed up in marble and glass. And over the following weeks, as legal battles quietly unfolded and hospital rooms replaced boardrooms, Ethan spent his days beside Lila's bed, listening to stories he should have heard years ago, learning the rhythms of his children's laughter and fear, promising them stability not through money alone but through presence. And when Lila woke fully and saw him there, expecting excuses, he gave her none, only accountability, admitting that he had chosen wrong and asking not for forgiveness, but for the chance to do better. And slowly, cautiously, she allowed him back into their lives not as a savior, but as a man who would have to earn his place one day at a time. And true to his word, Ethan halted the luxury development entirely, stunning the city when he announced a redesigned project that replaced glass towers with affordable housing, green space, and community services, funding it personally while taking responsibility publicly for past mistakes. And when reporters asked why he would sacrifice profit, he answered simply that some foundations matter more than money. And on a quiet evening months later, as he walked through a small park built on land once marked for demolition, holding Noah's hand while Claire laughed ahead of them, Ethan Reynolds understood that becoming a father was not a title granted by biology or wealth, but a commitment, forged through choice, humility, and courage. And though the journey ahead would be long and imperfect, it was finally real. And for the first time in his life, the future he was building wasn't measured in square footage or returns, but in moments that would never need to be torn down.